The time is now 6 o'clock, and I will call our work session meeting to order. This work session will be on the Parks and Open Space Master Plan, work session on System Development Charges, also known as SDCs, and I'll call on our Park and Recs Director, Susan Muir, to brief us on this.
Hi, everyone. Susan Muir, Parks and Rec Director. I'll introduce our consultant team who's online in a minute, but I just wanted to set the stage for the conversation tonight. So about a year ago, we had a generic work session with Amanda Guile-Hinman at the time to sort of lay the groundwork just generically on system development charges. And we knew there were going to be some plans coming up and getting the same conversation, but with more specificity, and that's what tonight is. We're going to dig a little deeper into parks system development charges and what that might look like. And keep in mind, our goal throughout this has been to develop a modern park system that's adequately funded and grounded in equity. And so we're working on that adequately funded part tonight. We're going to start that work. The last time our methodology was updated was in 1998. And at the time, we were recovering about 50% of the costs we could. You've been talking a lot about the general fund. Everybody's been talking a lot about the general fund. So just a reminder, this is not a part of the general fund. The system development charges for parks has their own fund, Fund 50, and that's what we use. So the system development charges don't touch the general fund. So we had the work session about a year ago, and then in June we came back to kick off the Parks and Rec Open Space Master Planning process. Since that time, we've completed the inventory and digitized it, which we didn't realize how long that was going to take and how out of date our electronic records were, but it's now a layer on our online GIS information through the engineering webpage, and thanks to John Barnes for doing all of that. We've also done our best to get participation in our online survey, and thank you to several of you who shared it and spread the word about that as well. We've held one focus group, actually about 4 hours ago, we held a focus group, and we have another focus group getting scheduled. Once we're done with all of that public engagement, that's when we'll form the vision and come back to you with the contents of the feedback of what we're hearing. I'm getting asked a lot how the response rate was on the survey, and so I just wanted to give you a couple of nuggets. The consultant team will debrief this entirely with you at a later date, but we did have over 2,300 people engage with the survey, and the Parks and Rec staff hit it out of the park on this one. They did a great job literally hitting the pavement about it. Just a couple of the numbers from the survey, over 95% of the people who responded said parks and open spaces are either important or extremely important in their lives. And the reason why they noted that they were important is to enjoy the outdoors and nature, being active in exercise, and gathering with friends and family. So I think, post-pandemic, we're seeing a lot of that come through in our surveys and our responses from the public. So with that, I think Michaela's online. Oh, there you are. Hi, Michaela. So I'm going to introduce Michaela Jellicoe from our consulting team, and she's been leading the efforts on the system development charges and where we're going to go in McMinnville. So I'll turn it over to you, Michaela.
Thank you, Susan. Good evening. As Susan mentioned, I am Michaela Jellicoe. I'm a senior economist with Community Attributes, and I am working with MIG to help update your system development charge methodology. I'm gonna share my screen if possible. All right. Okay. So as Susan mentioned, I'm here to talk about system development charges for parks, and we are at a preliminary stage still. So what I'm going to talk about this evening are some key methodology points as we really dive into the calculations that are important decision points. So I'm going to give you a brief overview of system development charges, just as a reminder of what we can and can't do with them. And then I will discuss some key points with the methodology and how we calculate the fees. And then I'll close with just a quick overview of what tasks are in front of us for the SDC. And then I'm happy to answer any questions that you might have. So a system development charge is a one-time payment that's paid by new development to cover the costs of capital facilities that are needed by new development. So only a new development triggers this fee, and its use is limited for capital facilities that actually increase the capacity of your system, or facilities that are needed to serve new development or growth within your city. There are a few reasons that governments charge SDCs. Firstly, is a source of revenue to pay for the costs of public facilities. Secondly, as a matter of policy, to ask that new residents to your city or growth pay a portion or their fair share of the costs to serve their needs. And as a matter of quality of life, public facilities and parks in particular are an asset to your city, and they're an asset for your residents, enhancing their quality of life in your community and the environment, and having those keep up with growth, make sure that level of quality of life continues for all of your residents. There are a few rules for SDCs and the governing from state law that we have to follow when we're developing the methodology. The first of these we call the fair share rule, meaning that you can ask growth to pay for their share of those costs. They can pay for their needs, but you cannot ask them to correct for any existing deficiencies within your system. The second is proportionate share. So the SDC must be proportionate to the impact. You can't charge for more than their relative impact on the system. Thirdly, you can't double charge. We call this the credits rule. Essentially, that we have to make sure in the methodology that there's a system of credits for any kinds of previous mitigation, any kind of payment that they've already made towards that particular system, in this case, park system. We can't ask them to pay for the same impact twice. And our methodology will make sure that all of this is clearly spelled out and how we're complying with each of these rules. And then lastly is the capital improvements plan. So any project that's eligible to be funded with SDCs that you plan to fund with SDCs must be included in your CIP. And so we will be working on the pros update to make sure that your CIP is updated, and we'll make sure that the link between the CIP and the methodology is very clear. There's some limitations on what SDCs can and cannot pay for. Oregon allows for an improvement fee, meaning that it can pay for the capacity increasing capital facilities in the CIP. So that's that growth pays for growth, any capital projects that serve their needs. You can also charge a reimbursement fee if the methodology identifies excess capacity. So in essence, if you have built capacity to serve growth in anticipation of that growth, you can ask them to reimburse you for the cost of that facility. You can also use SDCs to cover the costs of complying with SDC regulations. So you have some allowable administration costs within the SDC, but you cannot use them for any operations or maintenance costs. So anything that's a repair or replacement cannot be built or funded through SDCs. So the methodology topics in this presentation and in the memorandum that you received previously are broken into 4 categories. And there's going to be 12 topics that I cover within these 4 categories. The first of these is park types, ownership, and geography. And then we'll cover development that pays park SDCs, the basis for park SDCs, so some key methodology points and how we calculate them. And then we'll close with implementation issues. Types of parks and recreation facilities. So currently, your PROS plan is assessing your inventory of parks and recreation facilities and is likely going to categorize those into a few important categories. and your previous PROS plan did that, and your previous, your currently adopted SDC methodology actually spells out a few categories. However, ultimately, that's combined into a single citywide fee. So we're recommending that you continue with this this methodology where you have a single citywide category for all types of parks and facilities. This essentially gives you the most flexibility in how you use those SDC funds. You can create separate categories for different types of parks and recreation facilities, but that does limit how you then use those funds. So if you create a separate category for open space, for example, then you have to use the SDCs collected within that category to serve open space requirements. And so we're recommending that you continue with the approach that you currently have, allowing you the most flexibility in how you use those funds. You are also able to enter into interlocal agreements with other park providers, and you have the option to use SDC funds for parks and facilities that you have those interlocal agreements with. The previously adopted PROS plan actually references local school facilities, for example. So what we're going to do is match the inventory that you're working with for this PROS update and use that. And then you will have the option to use SDCs for whichever parks facilities that you choose in park projects that expand that system capacity. And that could be parks facilities that you have interlocal agreements with, or facilities that you retain ownership of in the future, however best serves those needs. Then the third category is service areas for park SDCs. So this is a little bit similar to that first topic about types of parks and facilities. You currently have a single citywide service area for your SDC. Some cities elect to create smaller service areas, but that can create a challenge of collecting sufficient fees within those service areas to actually fund a project. So essentially, if you designate multiple smaller service areas, any funds collected within those service areas must be used for facilities in those areas. So we're recommending that you continue using a single citywide service area just to maximize the flexibility in how you leverage those SDC funds collected.
And Michaela, just to weigh in here, the second option there that you're talking about, intergovernmental agreements with other providers. So that would cover long-term leases and or intergovernmental agreements where the ownership stays in like the school district or a soil and water conservation district or a land trust or something like that, correct?
Yeah, I think as long as you have an official agreement, with that provider, either through an interlocal agreement or a lease, you have the option to use those funds how you choose, as long as you're,
Chagrin, for those of you that know, that's the situation we have out there where we don't own the property, but we've made the improvement. So excellent.
Mm-hmm. All right, the next category we're going to talk about is development that pays park SDCs. And the first topic in here are improvement SDCs and reimbursement SDCs. You currently only have an improvement SDC because your methodology did not find any excess capacity in your system when it was developed. In conversations with staff, we think it's likely that we won't find excess capacity in this analysis either. However, we will conduct analysis to see if there is any potential excess capacity that you could use to charge a reimbursement fee. The next topic is types of development that are charged park SDCs. So right now, you only charge park SDCs to residential development. So dwelling units are the only development types that pay SDCs. You can, and many cities do, charge park SDCs to non-residential types of development, so commercial and industrial. And we know that, employees and visitors to commercial and non-residential use types benefit from your park system, either directly or indirectly. So our recommendation through conversation with staff is to calculate the SDCs for including non-residential development, and we will provide you with those calculations and a comparison to what residential only would look like, so you have the most information to make the choice that is best for your community. And either way, that methodology will comply with all of the rules and regulations that need to be met for your SDC. I will tell you that most likely the fee for non-residential is going to be rather small, and it will likely reduce the cost to residential development. So SDCs are like a pie. There's essentially, and we calculate the amount of SDC that you can charge. And if you carve out a portion of that to charge to non-residential development, it reduces the amount of pie that is charged to residential development. And typically those non-residential fees are quite small. So we'll provide you with the calculations both ways, and you can see which makes the most sense for your community. And then the measure of impact by development. So this is where we look at that proportionate share piece. Currently, you have a per dwelling unit fee. So houses of different sizes and different types all pay the same fee. And our recommendation is that we explore the data out there to see what options there are to potentially change the structure of your fee to enhance proportionality. We know that typically single family homes have more residents than multifamily homes, and that large single family homes typically have more residents than small single family homes. So we'll look at the data both by the type of unit and by size of unit, depending on the data that's available for your community, and present you with a few options that way so you can explore which seems to make the most sense for putting together a fee that is equitable for your community. All right, the basis for park impact fees, and this is really the core of how we calculate SDCs. And the first of these is the level of service metric and benchmark. So most SDCs are calculated using an acres per 1,000 population methodology. That's how you currently calculate it. And we will be looking at the inventory of your park system and what data you have available, because some new parks and SDC calculations are exploring what we call an improvement value, which is essentially looking at the total value or replacement value of your park system. So we're not just looking at the amount of land that you have in terms of level of service, but how much improvements are you providing to your community as a whole. This may not be possible depending on the data available on your park inventory, in which case we'll use the tried and true acres per 1,000 methodology that many cities have based their SDCs on in the past. And then the level of service benchmark is really asking, do we want growth to contribute towards parks at the rate that we already are at, so the current level of service, or do we want them to contribute towards what we want to be, or an aspirational level of service? We're recommending that you use the current level of service, and I have a visual to sort of explain what I'm talking about here. And this is an example from several years ago from the city of Kirkland in Washington, actually, but they wanted to use an aspirational standard, and they set it at 3 acres per 1,000 for neighborhood parks and community parks. And in the neighborhood parks category, the center bar on this chart, they had an inventory that was not quite at that 3 acres per 1,000 population, so they were deficient. And then in the community parks category, they actually had a surplus. So this creates some challenges in how you charge your park impact fee, because you can't ask new development to correct an existing deficiency. And so you have to identify how you're going to correct that deficiency if you want to charge an aspirational standard. So by asking growth to contribute toward, at the same rate that you are currently providing your residents, the same rate that your current residents have provided towards the system in the past, you avoid any issues of deficiency and surplus in the SDC calculations, and essentially ensure that growth is paying for the same level of service that your current system provides to your current residents. And then any additional aspirations that you have can be funded through other means. Already mentioned this, but you have to have any projects that you are intending to use SDCs for and that are eligible for SDCs in your CIP. So we will be working with MIG to identify those projects, and city staff, obviously, in the CIP update. And then we'll also make sure that our methodology documents those projects very clearly and their eligibility for SDCs in the methodology as well. So you have a very clear link between your methodology and your CIP and how you intend to serve the needs of growth. And the last topic is the availability and use of other funding sources. So it's important to identify if you have any existing funding already identified for projects that you plan to put on your CIP and use future SDCs for. We'll need to make sure that we identify any SDCs already collected to make sure that we're not double charging new development for those previously collected SDCs. And then we can also identify how any unallocated funding can be used to maximize your park system, essentially allocated to other projects, and using SDCs to serve the needs of growth and create new capacity. And the last topic are pre-implementation issues. I've already mentioned this a little bit, relationship to other mitigation requirements. If you have any other forms of mitigation for parks, we have to make sure that the methodology accounts for that. Conversations with staff have indicated that you don't have any other mitigation requirements for parks and recreation, so that shouldn't be an issue with this updated methodology. And with this update, it's a good opportunity to review and refresh any exemptions from the park SDCs. One that staff have identified is the affordable housing exemption, which does apply to the other types of SDCs that you have, but currently does not apply to parks. So as a part of this update, we'll be looking at those exemptions and funding options to help ensure that any new exemptions that you may want to apply don't result in reduced funding for parks capital projects. And then the last topic is an annual inflation adjustment. I think, as we all are aware, the cost of land and construction increase over time, but you don't necessarily update your SDCs all that often. So it's important to have an annual inflation adjustment to make sure that those fees keep up with the rising costs of those capital construction projects. You do have an annual inflation adjustment, which is great. It's you use the construction cost index of the engineering news record, and this is the same index that's applied to all of your current SDCs. One topic that we have discussed with staff is exploring the use of a composite index that also factors in the cost of the land, not just the cost of construction, because they don't tend to see increases in costs at the same rate. So as we do this update, and as you start to think about updates to your entire suite of SDCs, this is another topic that you might want to address and explore. So my next steps will be to work with MIG and Susan and her team to use that inventory of parks and recreation facilities to calculate the parks SDCs using these methodology topics and providing, all the different permutations that you would like to explore. And then we'll prepare the report and any rate comparisons so that you have the maximum amount of information needed. And then we'll take that to staff to make sure that we incorporate any comments and feedback from them. And then we'll come back to you with a presentation of those maximum allowable fees and the differences that these methodology options result in. And then we will revise and provide you with a final report. And that's my presentation. And I'm happy to take any questions you might have.
All right. Any questions on the right side of the dais?
I just wanted to clarify something. You said that we're currently not, we are assessing the SDCs for affordable housing as far as that's concerned. We don't assess other SDCs, but we do assess, never mind.
Parks.
We do exempt other SDCs, but we do not exempt the park fees, correct?
Correct, and I think that was about 3 years ago when we had that conversation related to what exemptions would we be giving, and at that time, the parks were held out of the eligible SDCs for exemption. So, and we're not necessarily opposed to waiving fees. We just want to make sure that the fund stays whole. As Michaela said, it's important for us to recognize either something declines in terms of the capital improvement plan or doesn't get implemented the way it is, or we find other sources. And there are a lot of examples of other sources that can supplement. I think I've mentioned this before, but City of Eugene does a $100,000 general fund grant program. They open it up on January 1st of every year. Any affordable housing project applies for that money to be able to use that to offset their SDC costs. And then once that money is gone, anybody that's looking for that would need to wait until the next year's grant cycle happens. So there are ways that we can talk about that so that the affordable housing projects aren't themselves as impacted by the fees.
Well, I don't have any problem actually with that particular fee being assessed on the affordable housing simply because they will be using the parks, and it makes sense. Also, for commercial and industrial property, I seriously believe that they should be assessed the SDC fees too. Having a hard time talking tonight. Simply because, parks are a huge part of why businesses come here. It's how they recruit other people. It's the amenities that we have here. So I feel strongly that that should be also assessed.
Zach, did you have something?
Yeah, thanks. I'll piggyback off that question, and I guess it seems that question was answered, but I had a note in there, so I'll just lump my support on for if we exempt, or if we want to exempt for particular projects or create an incentive by offering an exemption. I think, as Susan illustrated or said, that it would be important to keep the fund whole while we're able to do that. And so I'd be interested to see not only the Eugene model, but perhaps that the next information that comes back to us could have some models of what other people do and how they do it successfully, and maybe sanity checked and right-sized for what McMinnville could do to make that work. That, and then under sort of category 5, or number 5, types of development in your staff report, had a question about, I think it was in there, change of use. Was wondering is that a building code change of use or planning change of use? What change of use nomenclature are we operating under? When you refer to change of use, specifically when you refer to something that doesn't qualify for SDC being a change of use of a space that does not add square footage.
Right, so if you change, I think ultimately you're gonna wanna work with your building department to figure out how to implement this, since change in use is an important component of permitting. But essentially, any change in use that doesn't result in an increase in the intensity of that use, or the number of employees per square foot, or the size of the building, wouldn't result in a fee. So, and typically what you do if a change in use does result in an increase in the fee is that you would calculate the fee for the whole space, and then you would calculate the fee for the existing space and for the existing use and subtract that from it. So they're only paying for that increase in use, or that increase in their capacity. Does that make sense?
Oh yeah, and that gets at what your credit scenario of, we've already charged the builder for the construction of this space, but it was at this lower burden on the system. A new user's coming in, not adding any space, but is operating something that's 3 times more burdensome on the system, as we've deemed it in our analysis. And so, can we capture the delta in the burden on the system for a change of use that doesn't add new square footage but adds additional burden?
I think you can, and it all depends on how you end up structuring that fee and how you end up calculating the fee. So some cities just charge a flat fee for non-residential per square foot, and it's essentially like an average. It accounts for like an average employees per square foot. You can't actually charge based on the number of employees. So if they, actually change the number of employees, that you can't charge for that. You can't link it to employees directly, but we can essentially say, like, on average, commercial development hosts, 700 employees per square foot. So the fee is going to be X. And if in that case, so if you only have a single fee for all non-residential development, you're only going to have a change in use when you add space. But if you choose to make it a little bit more complicated to administer and have multiple types, so you could separate retail from warehousing, for example, because they have vastly different intensity and uses, in that, employee and visitor numbers, then yeah, if they changed from a warehouse to a restaurant, you could charge for that delta. It does add some complexity on, the actual administration of the fee when you choose, when you use that model.
Yeah, and I know that there's some discussions at the state on change of use from commercial to residential to get away from making it more difficult to onboard housing, but I can think of other cases where there would be additional burden worthy of capturing, and perhaps maybe staff could comment on the efforts that they already do to capture those. I know transportation being one that jumps out to me, of one that we calculate and we can apply credits for, but no additional square footage scenarios where it's a change of use to a heavier burden. We often look at SDCs, such as transportation, on those projects. So what would it be in addition to the efforts we already do to add parks to that?
Yeah, and this is where I'm going to rely a little bit on my coworkers, Heather and Ann, because they actually calculate and collect the SDCs at the Community Development Center. What I can say, and just stepping back for a minute, this is why this is so important. It seems really detailed and really somewhat mundane, but importance of us having these plans in front of us that are developed at the level of detail that we can be consistent and be thinking about the future and really having everything add up is so important. We've already been having internal conversations about implementation and how we can do that so that it's easy for everybody. We can be consistent. Sometimes now we kind of piece together the way things were done in the past to try and figure out. So this is just a critical step in doing these plans to be successful for a CIP. And Heather, I don't know if you want to jump.
So currently now, when a building permit comes in, engineering reviews it for a change of use. We do it based on land use, and then SDCs are applied, calculations are applied, and if there's a differential in terms of more intensive use, then the SDCs are applied that way. And we look at it from transportation is the ITE manual, and then wastewater is number of connections. So both methodologies sort of point to how they're applied at the building permit level, and then our engineering team is the one that puts it together. I think with the parks program, if it's done by either number of employees or a different type of methodology, it would be easy to bring that into the same program in terms of when we're applying it. Just as long as what I would say is, for a community this size and a team that size, we have teams that are typically smaller than the level of service for comparable communities, that the easiest we could make it in terms of the methodology, the better in terms of the application.
I've seen the transportation SDC methodology table, and so that is a high bar we can come underneath as far as ease of calculus, so I think we'll manage. So I guess I'll turn that into direction, or yeah, my preference would be to add to capture, see a model that would allow us to capture SDC charges from changes of use to additional burden to the system that don't add square footage. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Councilor Chenoweth, anything on your end? And then I'll look.
I did have another question.
Oh.
Sorry. Another question I had, a clarification question. You had talked about in the residential SDC program of exploring enhanced proportionality when it comes to looking at how we collect those. Are you saying we should do that, or no? It wasn't clear. I think you just, I don't know if you were just referencing the concept of that or recommending looking at that.
I think we should look at it. It's really a decision that's up to you. And I think it's a decision that's both on an implementation side and on, in your conversations about equity and essentially, how you want to administer the fee. I typically would recommend that we use something that breaks out between the size of dwelling unit. And it doesn't have to necessarily be based on size, but even just breaking out between single family and multifamily would enhance the proportionality of your fee. So right now, the way it works in essence is that smaller homes are subsidizing the impact of larger homes. If typically larger homes have more people that then have access to your park system. So my recommendation is that I will explore the data available either by the type of unit or the size of unit. Size of unit is not, I can't guarantee that would be available. But essentially what it could allow us to do is create bins. So like any unit that's less than 500 square feet typically has, one person per dwelling unit, while a 5,000 square foot house typically has, 3 persons per dwelling unit. And we can create a fee structure that, breaks out those, those sizes. That is more intense on the implementation side. So, it may be simpler to use single family and multifamily. And if ultimately on the implementation side, it's just much preferable to continue with your current approach of, applying that fee per dwelling unit, we'll, make sure that we're using the appropriate persons per dwelling unit conversion to make sure that it's proportionate to your average dwelling unit in the city. So either way, you'll be covered in terms of that proportionate share, but there is just, in my opinion, adding those breakouts will, it does enhance the equity and link it a little bit more closely to the actual impact that those new dwelling units have.
Great. Yeah, go ahead, Susan.
And Michaela, we are going to bring back options for them to make the policy call on it at the next, so you all will see the differences and the different ways it impacts the fee.
Great. Yeah, thank you. That concludes my questions.
Thank you, Councilor Geary. Councilor Peralta on Zoom, do you have any questions?
Yeah, thank you, Council President Garvin. First, I really appreciate, Councilor Geary, the questions that you put forward. I agree with your line of thinking. My question is more related to the last comments that the consultant made regarding assumptions that we make in terms of house size and those kinds of things related to occupancy and how that affects the system. And I guess my first thought on that is that I'd like to do what we can to encourage greater equity in the system so that we're applying lower system development charges to multifamily dwellings relative to larger single family on large lot type subdivisions. And I just wanted to throw that out there, and I'm not really sure how you get there exactly in terms of the breakpoints, but to me, that's just a very important value that I'd like us to consider, that essentially the higher income, higher properties, pay their fair share that when they have a greater ability to pay. And second, I guess I also agree with Councilor Menke's comments related to how the system development charges might be applied to other categories. That's all I have. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Peralta. I know Councilor Payne had a question.
Thank you, Council President. Michaela, thank you for a really detailed presentation. Yes to what Councilor Menke and Councilor Peralta said. I want to go back to what you were stating earlier, Michaela, and Councilor Geary also with examining what other cities maybe in similar size are doing, and your mention of the size of residents. And I just want to throw this out here that I know that Albany recently made a change to their systems development fee based on bedroom size, tiered based on that bedroom size. So that might be one city to explore. And then I agree with Councilor Menke about, multifamily versus smaller size, and I kind of have the opposite view. I appreciate Councilor Peralta's perspective, and I agree with it, but also on the opposite end of the spectrum, smaller dwellings, more affordable housing on smaller lots. On the other end, of that, to gain more affordable housing in McMinnville.
Any other questions on the left, Councilor Chenoweth or Geary?
No, thank you very much. I appreciate the presentation.
Councilor Menke?
I also appreciate the detailed presentation. The proportionality thing, the equity, I agree with also.
Yeah, definitely appreciate the presentation and all the staff that worked on this to bring this forward. And thanks for getting it all wrapped up in a nice presentation for us, Susan and Michaela. I would just echo what Councilor Geary and Peralta shared. And my other thoughts would just be that you guys already call it out in the plan, but just would really like to see, even though it sounds like we're all leaning towards a residential and non-residential, but still come back with, if we did go just residential, what that would look like. Not much of the discussion here was pointed that way, but I think it's just really good for comparison when we do bring it back before us.
I'm hearing you loud and clear that the equitable look at this, putting this through an equity lens, is a really important piece, and then also bringing forward data to demonstrate that, and also options and what that might look like to the community, both in terms of equity and just in terms of budgeting and how we achieve our projects that will be listed in the capital improvement plan. So now we'll move on to the visionary part of creating the parks plan and developing the capital improvement plan, and then Michaela will bring back the solution to how to fund it, right, Michaela?
I will, yes.
All right. With that, I will now join the joint work session meeting tonight at 6:45, and we'll resume our normal council meeting at 7 p.m. All right, we do have quorum, and we don't have, oh, Councilor Peralta is on. Okay. The time is now 7 p.m., and I will call to order our regular scheduled council meeting. Claudia, can you do roll call?
Counselor Geary,
Good evening.
Counselor Minke,
Good evening.
Counselor Chenoweth,
I guess good evening.
Counselor Payne. Present. Counselor Peralta.
Here.
Mayor Drapkin is absent this evening, and Council President Garvin.
Here. Now I'll call on Councilor Geary to lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right, now we have a proclamation for Women's History Month. Whereas Women's History Month is a celebration of women's contributions to history, culture, and society, and has been observed annually in the month of March in the United States since 1987. And whereas Women's History Month is a dedicated month to reflect on the often overlooked contributions of women to United States history, whereas McMinnville women of every race, class, and ethnic background have made historic contributions to the growth and strength of our city in countless ways, and whereas McMinnville women have played and continue to play critical economic, cultural, and social roles in every sphere of life of the city by constituting a significant portion of the labor force, working both inside and outside of the home. And whereas McMinnville women have played a unique role throughout the history of the city by compromising the majority of the volunteer labor force of the city, whereas McMinnville women were particularly important in the establishment of early charitable, philanthropic, and culture institutions in our city, and whereas McMinnville women of every race, class, and ethnic background served as early leaders in the forefront of every major social change movement, and whereas McMinnville women have courageously served our country in the national and state armed forces, whereas McMinnville women have been leaders not only in securing their own rights of suffrage and equal opportunity, but also in the industrial labor movement, the civil rights movement, and other peaceful movements, which create a more fair and just society for all. And whereas McMinnville women of every race, class, ethnicity, gender identity, and sexual orientation continue to make strides in reclaiming their rightful leadership roles in our collective histories, our present and our future. Now therefore I, Adam Garvin, Council President of the City of McMinnville, do hereby proclaim that March is designated as Women's History Month in the City of McMinnville, and do recommend the observance and appropriate programs, ceremonies, and activities. I also invite all to visit www.womenshistorymonth.gov and www.womenshistory.org to learn more about the generations of women who have left enduring imprints on our history. In witness whereof I hereunto set my hand and cause the official seal of the City of McMinnville to be affixed to this, the 28th day of February, 2023. Adam Garvin, City Council President. Now that leads us to comments from members of the community. Is there any interested members of the audience to public comment? And is there anybody on Zoom that wishes to comment? You can use the raise your hand feature and Claudia will unmute your mic. All right, hearing no one, we'll move on to advice and information items, starting with reports from councilors on Committees and board assignments. I'll start with Councilor Chenoweth to my left.
Thank you, Council President. MEVLC met. We voted in our chair and vice chair and had a presentation covering the current state of the, actually that was last month. This month we had a presentation covering how we wanted to go about potentially researching and looking into the business licensing fee and to see if there is an appetite for that among the business community. Parkway met, and we covered where the current bypass is at. Right now, some of the focal points that are being discussed is what's going to happen at McDougal Corner with money that was earmarked from Suzanne Bonamici to McDougal Corner, and how for doing some realignments to make that area a little less dangerous. Purchasing right-of-way for 2B, and of course, the ever need for funding for all of these different projects that we have in front of us. Thank you.
Councilor Geary.
Nothing to report.
Councilor Payne.
Landscape review met on the 15th and had a very long meeting over some 3 different street tree removals, and then also appointed a new chair to replace the new chair. So that was productive. And then they also began a work session on code amendments. Very productive.
Councilor Menke.
McMinnville Affordable Housing met last Wednesday. We swore in a number of new members, at least 5, I think. We also selected the chair and vice chair and had agency reports. The main thing we were reporting on is the construction excise tax, and the construction excise tax subcommittee came with recommendations, and the recommendations as approved were predominantly using CET funds to increase inventory of affordable housing by leveraging, using the funds to help them gain further grants and things like that. Build a reserve of at least $300,000. $300,000 was discussed several times, and we don't think that's enough. Before expending CET funds, however, stakeholders will continue to share potential strategic opportunities that may warrant consideration before them. Begin to plan and prioritize use of CET funds for a 5-year horizon with annual funding allocations with initial start dates triggered by initial accumulated reserve. And the fourth item is wait before engaging in more formal community and stakeholder outreach regarding priorities and needs for the use of CET funds until the initial reserve is closer to being established. Check in approximately quarterly regarding the reserve balance. We also did kind of an update on our work plan since we had a number of new members and everybody needed to kind of be updated, and that was about the substance of the meeting.
Thank you, Councilor Menke. Councilor Peralta on Zoom.
Thank you, Councilor Garvin. We had the annual meeting of Council of Governments. Thank you to Council President Garvin and Mayor Draken and others who came to attend. It was a good showing for McMinnville. We got to award the Stratus Village project the Regional Cooperative Award. And Lisa Lino is the incoming chair of Council of Governments that I moved to past chair. The Legislative Committee of COG hasn't met since the last meeting, so look forward to that tomorrow, and that's my report. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Peralta. For my reports, we have Airport Commission meeting tomorrow. It's via Zoom. If anybody would like to attend, it's at 3 o'clock. YCOM hasn't met since our last meeting. Fire district stuff, I had planned to present a letter to you guys tonight in support. That'll actually come back at our first meeting in March. And the reason for that is our 805 got filed and it had a chance for appeal, and no appeals were made on that. And so right now we're waiting for a ballot measure number on our 803 in the county to file that, which should come back to us this week, but we still don't have a ballot measure number. So kind of a formality that the timeline didn't line up, but We'll have that back before you guys. And that night I'll also have some SEL forms to formally put your name in the voters pamphlet for you to sign. If you are going to miss that meeting, I just ask you to reach out to me so I can circle around with you so we meet the filing deadline for that. Other than that, Union President Godfrey and myself have been meeting and on the speaking tour quite a bit. Lots of meetings, some multiple times a day. And so far, feedback has been generally positive on the fire district. And had some really good meetings with, we had a unanimous endorsement from the chamber, and we got an endorsement from Yamhill County Democrats, and we have some other big endorsements lined up. So thank you for all your guys' support, and having unanimous support of the council is a big part of that. So thanks for your help in moving this forward. With that, we'll move on to department heads, and call on City Manager Towery first.
Thank you, Council President Garvin. A couple of items to report. We were not able to reach agreement with a final candidate for the city attorney's position, so we'll be rebooting that process. I'll have a more detailed memo to you later this week about our next steps. Also a reminder that I'll be leaving town next Tuesday for a combination of ICMA business and some personal time. Highlighted that to you in an email a couple of weeks ago, but I'll send out a reminder later this week with more details on that. And that's all I have to report. Thank you.
Community Development Director Heather Richards.
Yes, thank you. There's been a couple of items that we were getting a lot of phone calls about, so I wanted to share them with you and the general public. We sent out a postcard mailing a couple of days ago to 12,500 properties in McMinnville, all residential properties, letting them know about our upcoming public hearing on March 16th with the Planning Commission to consider amendments to each residential zone relative to short-term rental permits. If anybody has questions about what they receive, feel free to call our office and planning, and we're happy to walk you through that. We also are in discussion about a natural hazards program, which is a mandated planning program we need to do at the city. And there was an article about that in the paper. We've gotten a lot of phone calls about that as well. And so we encourage people to call us and walk through any of their questions they have or anxieties and fears. It's important for us all to have that discussion before we move forward with this program. But essentially, when there's new data relative to hazards, we need to plan for protection of people and property, and that's the work that the Planning Commission is taking on right now, and we'll come to you shortly. We have that planned for a public hearing with the Planning Commission on April 6th right now, tentatively, and a mailing will go out for that one too. And we hope to have an interactive map on the website where people can go and find their parcel and see if it's impacted by that work. And then lastly, we've been working, we went to the Yamhill County Board of Commissioners last week to ask them to consider an emergency declaration of homelessness here in Yamhill County. The reason we did that was in an effort to become part of the governor's executive order that has set aside $130 million for counties that are identified in that executive order for resources to help reduce the impact of homelessness in those counties. The funds can be spent in a variety of different ways, and we felt that the Yamhill County data met the performance metric to be able to participate in that executive order, except for the particular data we did not collect in Yamhill County in 2022 due to resources associated with COVID, and so this county and many other counties were left out of the executive order. We do have other data that we've brought forward, the counties considering that they need to declare the emergency at the county level, and then that is sent to the governor's office to be amended into the executive order. So the Board of Commissioners will consider it this Thursday. They're asking the questions they need to ask to understand the impact to the county, to their staffing, to our staffing, and the types of resources that it will bring to the county. But we're hopeful because we think it will help us access significant funds to address the impacts of homelessness in Yamhill County. If we are not in the executive order, there's another bill that's rolling through the legislature, which will bring all other counties that weren't part of the executive order into a program where there will be $25 million. So the rest of the state has $25 million. And those resources will be spent in the same way. So we feel the odds are better if we're in the $130 million pot for that. So those are our 3 larger projects that we've been working on where we're getting some phone calls right now. So thank you.
Thank you. Parks Director Susan Muir.
Thank you. It may be snowing outside these days, but we're thinking about summer. Tomorrow, registration opens for baseball, softball, summer camps, and park rentals will all be open online. So if anybody's thinking about it, tomorrow's the day. And that's it.
Recorder Claudia.
Nothing to report.
Thank you. And on Zoom, we have Director Ann Pagano.
Good evening. Nothing to report tonight. Thank you.
And we have Finance Director Jennifer Collier on there.
Good evening. I'm coming to you from Seaside at the Oregon Government Finance Officers Association. It's been a great meeting, as they typically are, staying on top of the new compliance issues that we need to be keeping our eyes on, as well as just best practices and hearing about what folks are doing in other jurisdictions that would be helpful for us to apply. Then in terms of the municipal court, we are keeping our eyes on the weather and to see whether we need to do any kind of delay or hopefully not, but potentially a closure of municipal court tomorrow. So just also a shout out in particular to our brethren over in the street department. They do an amazing job keeping our streets clean and safe for us. And so just thanks for our operations just generally, but Muni Court in particular for tomorrow. So that's all I've got this evening. Thanks.
All right, and we have our communications Noel online.
Good evening. Just one quick thing about the Show the Love campaign that we were running for the community awards. We had 40 total nominations come in, so that feels really nice. That's all I have to report tonight.
And are those closed, Noel? They closed today?
They closed today, yeah.
Okay. Thank you. With that, we'll move on in our agenda to our consent agenda. Is there any items on the consent agenda a counselor would like removed?
Hey, I would like, hold on, let me get back to the list. The November 2022 minutes. Well, I guess we can vote. I'll just abstain. And I have a question on the resolution 2023-11.
So, Councilor Pan, I'm hearing item A and item C of the consent agenda you'd like to be removed?
C can stay. I'll just abstain. It's fine.
Okay. Anything else any counselor would like removed? Hearing none, we'll pull item A off the consent agenda and then vote on the consent agenda items B through F. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Oh, I would move to approve that action.
I would second it.
Okay.
And then I would vote in favor.
Me too.
So we have a move by Councilor Geary and a second by Councilor Menke. All in favor?
Aye.
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 Opposed? And so that takes us to what was item A on the consent agenda, resolution number 2023-11. A resolution authorizing the approval of an intergovernmental agreement between the City of McMinnville in the city of Toledo, Oregon regarding municipal judge appointments. I'll start with you, Councilor Payne. You said you had some discussion?
Thank you. It's probably just a housekeeping thing, but in the resolution, it states that judge is employed as a part-time judge in Toledo and a city judge by contract here in the resolution, and then in the IGA, it states that he's a contract staff person for both. So I don't know, because they're both signing documents, I don't know if there's, that discrepancy is relevant.
Oh, Jennifer, Finance Director Collier, could you help us with that?
Well, actually, that level of detail, that seems like a legal point. Is Walt in the room?
Walt is not in the room, and I don't see him on Zoom either. That's who I was going to call on until I saw you pop up.
Okay. Well, he has a contract with the city of McMinnville and is an employee. So it may be that the language works, but geez, I really don't feel competent to note whether that's actually problematic.
City Manager Tower, could you help us with that?
Yeah, my recommendation is we'll just roll this item to the next council meeting, and we'll have that question answered as part of the staff report.
Okay, so we'll table resolution.
Before we table it, may I ask a quick question? Since it got put on here, I'm going to throw this out there. I know there's been some discussion in the community that we may need to increase the use of our municipal judge. This won't limit us from being able to do that, will it?
It will not.
Thank you.
Any other discussion? Councilor Peralta, do you have anything?
No, thank you.
Hearing no other discussion, we will move to table Resolution 2023-11 to our next City Council meeting, which would be March 14th. And so moving on from that, we have new business. And Heather, do you have that slide handy?
Yeah, so let me introduce this very quickly. So your new business tonight is to take action on a short-term rental permit at 790 Northwest 21st Street. This was docket STR 7-22 in our system. The Planning Commission denied the permit. It was appealed to City Council. The appeal docket is AP 1-22. At the City Council meeting, it was determined that the city had not issued a decision within the 120 days of issuing a decision, and the applicant chose to file a writ of mandamus with the circuit court. And so the city and the applicant have been in negotiations on a settlement with issuing the permit with conditions of approval, and staff is recommending moving forward with that. I don't know if Carrie wants to share more in that regard in terms of our legal counsel, and then I will bring up a recommended motion for you to consider. Carrie, you're muted.
Sorry, Heather, I don't have anything to add. Thank you.
So on the screen is a recommended motion. This is our world of legalese for you to consider.
Could you move, Claudia, could you move the, up on this? Oh, I can look up there and do it, I guess.
Yeah, that's perfect.
Thanks.
Should it start with I hereby or I move?
It should be, I hereby move entry of an order.
Thanks, Carrie.
I hereby move, no.
You want me to make a
So
motion, sir?
I would like to ask for a motion if,
I will read the motion. I'd be happy to present it. I hereby make a motion to authorize entry of an order in the circuit court case of Legal versus City of McMinnville, 23 CV 00844, that authorizes approval of the application for a short-term rental, subject to the conditions as recommended by staff with one revision. An amendment to the condition 3.g requiring the name and contact information of the emergency contact be provided to the Community Development Office, subject to no fees or costs, including attorney fees, to be sought by either party.
Second.
So I've here a move by Councilor Minke and a second by Councilor Chenoweth. All in favor, say aye.
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 All opposed? Hearing none, motion passes unanimously, 6-0.
Thank you, Carrie.
Thank you, Carrie.
Thank you.
And with that, anything for good of the order? With that, I will now adjourn the city council meeting at...
Actually, I do want to say something for the good of the order, if I might. I just want to give a shout out to the police department and the fire department for what's been going on with the fentanyl in our community, and what they went through Monday a week ago. Thank you very much. Sad to see somebody lose a life. I'm glad to see an arrest was made in that case, in a very quick time frame. But just thank you for the efforts that you guys do, particularly since you're in the room. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Councilor Chenoweth. Anything else for the good of the order? With that, I will adjourn the city council meeting at 7:27 p.m.